All right, and another big reveal here today. We had the Dark Elf in-engine trailer yesterday. Or was it yesterday? Yeah, it was like some day ago. And we had the High Elf gameplay video earlier in the week. But today we got the full Dark Elf roster reveal. So a lot of great things in that roster reveal. Confirmed a lot of facts that a lot of us have been speculating about. I know in some of my videos I had talked about, things being this way or that way or this way, so on and so forth. But we finally kind of got a good idea of what's going on with the Dark Elves. So I want to go through some of my notes from that cast here today. We'll talk about the legendary lords, the generic lords, heroes, etc., etc., etc. But we'll also go into the units that they missed, the ones that didn't include. So we shall start, as always, with the legendary lords. And we've seen him quite a bit, and we saw Morathi as well in the in-game trailer. But we'll start with Malekith. He's going to be able to ride a Cold One chariot, and Seraphon, his black dragon. Now, they did say he's going to be a caster plus warrior, so kind of a really good hybrid and compares to Manfred von Karstein. So it's going to be kind of interesting because they said he's even stronger in both melee and casting than good old Manny. But Manny definitely has a better skin, him not being burnt to a crisp like Malekith is. And that he'll also have the Black Dragon, Seraphon, will have Noxious breaths, which is true to the tabletop, so it's awesome. But this is going to be a poisonous breath that actually weakens you. We don't have the actual stats of how it weakens, but if I scroll down here to the notes on the Black Dragon, we have that maybe it's a melee attack penalty or weapon strength penalty. We're not really sure here, but it is rather long lasting. It's going to last like 30 to 60 seconds, they were saying. But with Malekith, we do have a pretty amazing unit here. With what we've already seen with the Lizardmen and with High Elves, we have a distinctive Caster Lord and a distinctive Warrior Lord. So this time around, we're going to actually have a hybrid, which makes for a pretty exciting unit choice with Malekith. And they did hint that Malekith will give a faction bonus to Blackguard, the Blackguard of Nagaron, which are his personal guard. So they didn't talk about this with Morathi, but it makes me think that maybe Morathi will have a bonus to using Witch Elves or maybe Hag Sorceresses. I'm sorry, Death Hags, not Hag Sorceresses. Death Hags will maybe have a Death Hags or Sorceresses themselves might have, maybe they come out with increased ranks or levels on their character profile. Maybe they get a bonus on that. Maybe they even just start with them. So we're not sure. That's purely speculative. But speaking of Morathi, she is the caster lord here. She's going to be on foot or her dark Pegasus Sulephet. She's either going to have two lores, strictly dark lore, or some sort of like amalgamation, like we have with Mazdamundi. He pulls from I think it's Heaven's Light and High Magic. But I wonder with Morathi if she's going to pull from maybe Shadow and Dark, or maybe she's going to have Shadow and Dark. Maybe, I don't think really Death, but I would say maybe Shadow or Dark, more or less. Or again, an amalgamation. And the same thing I would say with Malekith. He's probably going to have strictly Dark spells or some sort of combination of spells like we've seen with the Wood Elf DLC and some of the other DLCs where they do have casters that pull from multiple lores. So it wouldn't be overall surprising if they didn't buck that trend. But they did say that Morathi is really so beautiful that she stuns people with her beauty, and she kind of has this aura of kind of weakening resolve. They specifically said, don't quote. I'm not going to be quoted on the specifics of what that does, but they were going to say it affects the fighting prowess of those that are attacking her. So maybe it drops their leadership or it drops their melee attack. It's going to be interesting to see what they're doing. They're probably working with some balance things right now, so they can't really explain exactly what it is. But she's going to be a pretty squishy character with some pretty heavy magic is what it sounds like. Now we'll jump on over to the generic lords. We've got a male Dreadlord and a female Dreadlord. The male Dreadlord is the kind of melee hybrid, more of a ranged choice. He's got a crossbow, and he can be on foot. Dark steed, a cold one, a dark Pegasus, or a black dragon. And it's the same thing with the female match. She can be on the same things, but she's more melee focused. She's got a shield, a sword, and a shield. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how that pans out and what kind of characters we get from them. Like how how actually, I don't know if I want to say stocky, but what kind of characters they're going to be overall. Are they going to be, like when you have, say, like an Orc War Boss is a little bit more tanky than, say, an Empire General or something of the sort. So I'm very interested to see how they do the Dark Elves and the High Elves for their generic lords, because a lot of what makes those armies so great are their special lords. So we'll jump over here now to the... so here's an interesting thing. They call the Khainite Assassin on the actual Total War Dark Elf army roster a missile hero, because it does have a handbow with it, a repeater handbow. But the Khainite Assassin from tabletop is typically more of an upfront and personal assassin type character. Maybe even has the duelist special rule. Who knows? That's purely speculative. But they're saying it's going to have different poisons, and those poisons are in the tabletop as well. But one of them is going to be like kind of like an acid potion to help with sieges, to kind of make... They were kind of started to talk about it breaking locks, but didn't go into it as much. So maybe we're finally going to have a mechanic where you can actually start with the gates completely open, a la the Canine Assassins here. So that'll, like you've had in previous Total War games. So they were saying that the assassins become better and better though through different poisons and potions. So I'm very curious to see what they do with that, because the Death Hags have that as well. We'll jump over them as well. So the Death Hag can actually be on foot or ride the Cauldron of Blood, which is now fully confirmed, especially after seeing the picture of it. But she'll have access to her Witch Brews, which, I mean, she's already great against infantry. Those Witch Brews are going to make her pretty much amazing when it comes to infantry, or maybe there's different mechanics in them. I think they were talking about one of them actually gives a madness, as I kind of scroll through my notes here. No, I'm sorry. No, that's the Witch Elves. I got ahead of myself. But Death Hags do have brews in the tabletop that infer different benefits. You can actually, I'll put that at the end of this video. There'll be a link to the Dark Elf army roster video that we went through every single thing from the tabletop, and we do touch on the Death Hag and what each one of her brews do, and on the assassins and each one of their poisons. So if you're interested in that, do jump over to those videos. They're quickly linked to where they are in the video themselves, and I think they're right after one another too, so you can just quickly kind of devour that information. But then we have the Sorceress here, Dark Pegasus and a Cold One and other mount options. It's your caster hero here, probably going to have access to Shadow and Dark as always, and a couple other lores. I'm not really sure which ones. I'm wondering if what they're going to do for High Elves and Dark Elves, how they're going to really show up their lore or offer out their lore. So they're going to be kind of like Empire where they can choose everything, or are they going to try and shoehorn them into specific ones? So that's what I'm kind of very curious about with the High Elf and Dark Elf lore, magic lores, with them already having their respective lores of magic, high and dark. So we then, though I want to kind of go into the Cauldron of Blood. They kind of just described it as a staircase on wheels. And what it really does is it causes allies to do large amounts of damage. But it also sends them in kind of a Lizardmen mechanic-esque rampage mode. So it can make a unit of Witch Elves even more destructive. Or a unit of Dark Elf Corsairs just even more destructive in a anti-infantry sense, and just ripping through things. So I'm really, really curious to see how that works. It's probably going to have the same kind of mechanic as like a Claw of Nagash, where it actually like benefits everything in its certain radius, but it's not going to be in and of itself that stalwart or tanky or anything like that. But one thing I do want to touch here on is the Murderous Prowess special rule. They finally kind of extrapolated on this, and I know we were talking about, okay, is this going to be how the High Elves get a bonus from actually having things, actually having their health higher? Okay, so is Murderous Prowess going to benefit the Dark Elves from having their health lower or the enemy lower? How's it going to work? So they described it pretty well, though, in this video. So it's really going to go off on the amount of killing that's happening. So it bestows around a 60-second or so buff on everyone that increases their killing ability. So maybe that's melee attack, weapon strength, who knows? So a really good tactic here would be to send in cheap troops to trigger the prowess, then attack with really the main army. That's what they were really saying in the video here. And the bar really fills up on the side. You can see it on the individual units as well. And that way it kind of gives you a warning of when it's going to happen, but you don't really get to know for sure is what they were saying. And part of how the Murderous Prowess works is it's going to have a superior inferior forces kind of trigger. So for superior forces, when you vastly outnumber your opponent, it's not going to trigger as easily. Kane's going to kind of look down on your Dark Elf army and go, you guys got this. But a vastly outnumbered Dark Elf army, it might be able to trigger a little bit easier because Kane's going, well, you're probably going to die, but bring as much blood to the table as you can. So I'm wondering if that will kind of move to the multiplayer as well. Will it kind of force a meta where Dark Elf players take smaller, more elite armies to trigger their murderous prowess quicker to be able to kill things faster? So that's kind of an interesting mechanic, and I'm not sure how they're going to move that across, because I could also see that being very, very badly cheesed. But we'll jump on now to the infantry units with Dark Elves. We've got the Bleak Swords and the Dread Spears, and we've seen these from a lot of videos. And just like in Tabletop, the High Elves don't have a sword infantry unit. Same thing here with the Total War Warhammer 2. The High Elves don't have that, but the Dark Elves do in both Tabletop and, as you can see now, they have it here in Total War. They're going to have large tower shields, the same thing as High Elves. They're going to have it's probably going to be a silver shield defense against missile attacks, with an option to be either spear or a sword. So you have a very strong central frontline unit. And from Bleak Swords and Dread Spears, you also get Dark Shards. And they said Dark Shards are going to have a shield variant with them, but they're just going to be your really early AP crossbow infantry. So they'll be able to have access to the repeater crossbows right out the gate, is what it sounds like. But we'll jump across now to the Black Arc Corsairs, who also have the repeater crossbow, but they have the repeater, they have a repeater, but it's a handbow variant, not a crossbow, just like the Canine Assassin gets. So this is your hybrid unit. You can either choose ones with just dual weapons or ones with the repeater handbow. And the handbow variant will have the size of a melee unit. So maybe think of something along the lines of the Free Company Militia kind of comparison, or maybe even what we're going to see with the Lothern Sea Guard. Maybe not the range to kind of balance things out, but it might have they might have at least that AP characteristic in there. So it does a lot of damage at close range, is what they were saying in specific. That it's kind of like a shotgun versus more of like a rifle approach. And the melee unit, the dual sword melee unit, actually is anti-infantry as well. And the whole Black Arc Corsairs will be considered heavily armored because they have their Sea Dragon cloaks. So just like the White Lions of Trace have their White Lion cloaks, Black Arc Corsairs have their Sea Dragon cloaks. And they also have, right next to them probably, will be the Witch Elves. As we've seen in a lot of the videos for the Dark Elves, they're extremely iconic. They're very... it's kind of easy to see a bunch of pale boobs jumping out at you. But they're another set of dual sword melee unit here. And they're going to be kind of like an anti-infantry blender unit, focused very heavily on the actual offense and less on the defense. They're not going to have as much weapon strength or melee attack, I would suspect, comparison to the Black Arc Corsairs. I'm sorry, they're going to have more than the Black Arc Corsairs, but have less melee defense and armor for sure. But they are going to have poison weapons, which is interesting, and they're going to have on that poison is Madness of Cain. So what it does is it'll poison units become, they get the Lizardmen mechanic of Rampage. So they'll just go running amok, all ass crazy all over the place. And on top of having Murderous Prowess, they'll actually have Murderous Mastery, which is just a step above Prowess, and it'll benefit the Cain buff, the Cain buff that already exists, but just makes it an even longer buff for them. So if it's already around 60 seconds, maybe it's going to be a 90-second buff or a 120-second buff. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And if we're talking about, how multiplayer will work out, are we going to have units armies of Witch Elves where the whole point of your other units is just to trigger Murderous Prowess for your Witch Elves to then let them go in there and get just completely crazy. Maybe, you see them as a really strong matchup against orcs, since they don't have a lot of AP, but they have a ton of anti-infantry, so they can just rip through orcs. So it'll be very interesting to see how we play with this Murderous Prowess mechanic, being that it's kind of a army-wide thing that kind of stands aside from the individual units mechanics, and how it will kind of play into that. But we'll move on further here to the Harganeth Executioners, and we've seen these guys here in some of the pictures as well. They have their giant great swords, their great sword infantry, just kind of like the Empire has, or how Wood Elves have, and so on. Or I'm sorry, those are glaives, but how various of the races have great sword infantry. And they were saying that they're nearly on par with High Elf Swordmasters, so that leads me to believe that the High Elf Swordmasters are going to have maybe a higher melee attack or a higher melee weapon strength. I'm not sure. But it leads me to believe there's something about the High Elf Swordmasters that makes them just a little bit more oomph. But they said they are very specialized in killing. With them being great swords, I would hope it's an anti-infantry and AP unit. They didn't say it outright, they just said specialized in killing. So just from greatswords in the past and my kind of speculation of it, I would assume AP and anti-infantry. And we've got our also our Blackguard of Nagaron, and we've kind of talked about them just a little bit ago here. And they're going to be kind of Malekith's bonus. He incurs a bonus to using Blackguard. So it's either going to be something that maybe reduces their overall recruitment rate or their overall upkeep cost, or even just the unit itself. So it's interesting to see what they're going to do with that, because they've used it for a lot of other units in the past. They've included these kind of specific bonuses for very specific units in armies. So with the Blackguard of Nagaron here, we have the Halberd Elite Infantry. They're the mirror opposite of the Phoenix Guard, but they're not quite as defensive. Their charge defense is really only against large, whereas the Phoenix Guard has it against everyone. So they're going to have their AP, they're going to have their high leadership, but I'm wondering if they're going to have anything else. They'll probably have anti-large because it being a halberd. The Phoenix Guard, though, have their ward save as well, that kind of cool aura you saw. So I'm very interested to see the unit cards for both of these and how they'll really stack up against one another. Will they both just kind of be a slow, grindy tanking unit, or will the Blackguard of Nagaron actually bring a little more melee defense, or a little more melee attack or melee weapon strength to bear? So we'll see how that kind of pans out. But one thing that the High Elves didn't have, and that was kind of a big bummer, is the High Elves didn't have Shadow Warriors, which are a pretty important unit just to have on the battlefield, because they serve a lot of harassment roles and a lot of backline roles that are really important to a very structured army with the High Elves. The Dark Elves get their Shades, which are the mirror opposite of the Shadow Warriors. And the Shades can come in one of three variants. You've got the Shades just default with just the repeater crossbows, or with dual swords, or with great weapons. So they're going to be fast. They're going to have stock, so they're going to be quite stealthy. Like I said, the default's got repeater crossbows, so it's going to be more of a hybrid unit. So the dual swords is anti-infantry. The great weapons is AP and anti-infantry. So it's going to be interesting to see how these things kind of play out with that stock mechanic in an already very aggressive, fast hit, heavy hitting army. You've got to now worry about stock units all over the fucking place. But they did say that he kind of hinted, he was saying like a good way to defeat Shades would be just to kind of stand there and try and take their shots. So it maybe makes me think that they have low ammunition. That's purely speculative, but it wouldn't be overly surprising as a way to kind of help balance them out and make it so that since they're fast and already stealthy, that they can at least not bring as much ammo to bear on the enemy. Taking a bit of a break here before we jump into the cavalry units, there is one thing they did say, since we're talking about stock and stealth units, that Lizardmen, Saurus and Cold Ones in specific, have predatory senses. It's going to be a rule for them, so they can actually sense stalking units. And I think that means that we're also going to see a lot of stalking units in the Skaven as well. So this is going to be interesting to have a unit, which there are very few units in Total War Warhammer 1, I would think, or that I know of, that actually can, quote unquote, sense stalking units. So it'll be very interesting to see this unit kind of come to the fore and how it will kind of change the way we have to use Shades if we're up against Lizardmen. But jumping over here into the cavalry units, and really my favorite units of the Dark Elf Army roster, we've got not the Dark Riders. We'll get to my favorite ones, but I'm talking about cavalry as a whole. But we've got the Dark Riders here, also with three variants, I believe. Let me take a look at the actual army roster. I'm pulling it off of my notes right here. Yeah, so 3 variants. Dark Riders with just their normal spears, Dark Riders with shields, and then Dark Riders with repeater crossbows. So this is your fast cav unit. It's going to be a cheap cav unit. We've seen this in a ton of other armies. Everyone's kind of got their own fast cav archer unit, mounted yeomen and the such. But they're going to have low morale, but they're really meant to really kind of clean up routing units to kind of add to that murder tally to keep your murderous prowess going. So it really kind of helps trigger that. But one thing to note is with the repeater crossbows, they can't fire those while moving. Being the way that they are, and the kind of mentality behind Dark Elves, they don't have that level of skill to pull off that kind of procedure. But that's just the fast cav units for Dark Elves. We do have quite a bit of shock cavalry and heavy cavalry, but we've got the Cold One Knights with lances. So we've talked a little bit about Cold One Knights in the lore video that I've done before, but there's one thing that I'll also add is Dread Knights. So that's a really cool thing here. So the Cold One Knights, they're going to have the lances. They're going to be they're going to have Cold One Primal Instincts, which means the Cold Ones have a chance to go on rampage if hurt too much. But the lance version is going to be good against anti-cav with good AP. The Dread Knights, though, are going to be your perpetual combat cavalry choice. They're going to have heavy armor, they're heavy cav itself. So they still suffer from the primal instincts of the Cold Ones, but they described it as, you can kind of think of the Cold Ones as the Dread Knights as Cold One cataphracts, which was actually a pretty cool imagery in my mind. But outside of the two Cold One cav choices, we also have Cold One chariots, and this is also a mount option for some of the lore choices we've seen before. So it also will have that primal instinct, and it'll have an anti-infantry mechanic, but it will have 2 repeater crossbows on it as well, so it'll have a bit of a range mechanic, and it's going to have a bit lower of health as well. They were saying that it's going to have a lower health, so meaning if you constantly have to cycle charge this, you're going to have to be pretty wary and make sure your what's it called, your micro's on point, or you're going to lose the Cold One chariots quite fast. But we'll jump over to the artillery now with the Reaper bolt thrower, and this is similar to the High Elf repeater bolt thrower, the Eagle Claw bolt thrower. 2 ammo options, 1 anti-infantry, 1 anti-large. So we've got that's the only artillery that the Dark Elves will have. The same thing in tabletop. A flying melee infantry. This is again going to be pretty run of the mill. It's just the Harpies, the same as the Beastmen. So you're kind of anti-artillery, light flying infantry. But now we get to 2 of the pretty iconic and huge units of the Dark Elf army. We have the War Hydra and the Black Dragon. So the War Hydra is going to have 5 heads, and it's going to, each one of those heads is going to spew fire, because we've talked about fire or breath attacks being added into Total War Warhammer 2. And also, it being a Hydra, it's going to regenerate, and it's going to regenerate better than most regeneration units. They were saying that it's going to be very hard to train and maintain, so that maybe kind of hints towards a primal instinct or a rampage mechanic. They didn't go into that, but that's really the War Hydra as it is. And then we've got the Black Dragon, as we've already really talked about. So it does have its noxious gas breath that weakens units, and it's pretty long lasting, like we talked about. So that covers the entirety of the Dark Elf roster itself, but there are some things that they did leave out of the roster. And I do cover all these in the Dark Elf lore video, not to keep toting it, but I don't want to keep putting a bunch of repeat information up for you guys that have already seen it. But here's some of the missing units that we didn't see. The Supreme Sorceress was one of them. That's the Lord choice caster for the Dark Elves. The Black Arc Fleetmaster, which is a hero choice actually. Oh, or is it a Lord choice? It's a character choice for the Dark Elves as well, and they are it's basically a Dark Elf Corsair made into a special character, more or less. Then there's the High Beastmaster, not to mention the Beastmaster itself, which is also not there. But the High Beastmaster is a Lord choice, I believe, as well, for the Dark Elf army. But you've got the Dreadlord, who is the Lord choice for their melee unit, or their melee Lord. But they also have a Master, which is their hero choice for their melee Lord. Also not in the game. I thought that the Master was going to be in it. There was that one video, or that one picture of a what looked to have been like a witch elf hag, and a guy who looked very much like what I thought would have been a Master, just a guy on foot, but somewhat ornate looking, looked a little bit more important. So I thought that guy was going to be a Master. Turns out he's not. Manticores are in the game as well in tabletop that did not make the cut, it looks like. Hoping that for them to come out in DLC, because Manticores are already in Total War Warhammer 1, and they're really, really cool units. I really enjoy using Manticores. Like their tail's pretty vicious in tabletop. You got to really watch out for it. But it did not include the Doomfire Warlocks, which are a dual kit with the Dark Riders. And the Doomfire Warlocks are really insane, really intense. They have a lot of really cool abilities, and they actually have spells on them, very much similar to the way that the Sisters of Sisters of Thorn do. So they have certain dark magic abilities. But you also have the Scourge Runner Chariot, the Sisters of Slaughter, as we talked about as well, and Charybdis. Charybdis is kind of a dual to the Hydra. It's just a different Hydra with different special rules and a different kind of profile as a whole. Then there's 2 other things that they didn't touch on at all, and it's the Bloodrack Medusa and the Bloodrack Shrine. The Bloodrack Medusa is on the shrine, but you can get one separately as well. And the shrine kind of has benefits to the army as a whole. The Medusa itself does its whole, like, you know, Medusa thing. Oh, look into my fucking eyes. Oh, you made a stone now, bitch. Like, that whole thing going on with it. But, again, all this is covered in that lore video. You can take a look at the end here. But that really kind of sums up the entirety of the Dark Elf roster. I'm really excited to see Dark Elves in action. When I was playing tabletop, it was always like, oh, do I want to go Dark Elves? I want to go High Elves? I want to go Dark Elves? I want to go High Elves? And I always ended up going High Elves over them. But now seeing like the Dark Elves with like their navy blue, purple, black magic spells, and how awesome Malekith and Morathi look, and really the justice that they've done to the entire army as a whole, I'm really, really, really excited to play Dark Elves. I think they're going to be really awesome, and I think that a lot of people that enjoy heavy-hitting, fast armies are going to enjoy Dark Elves, especially because they get rewarded for that kind of playstyle. Murderous Prowess triggers, and oh my god, E-Boner, I'm now slaughtering more and more things because my units can. So, really excited here, guys. Got a lot more coming out here next week. Everything was kind of put on hold with all the amazing reveals. Do keep in mind, though, next Wednesday they will be doing a reveal for what the DLC is going to be for Total War Warhammer 1. The final DLC is going to be revealed on that date. They're going to do a live broadcast of it. I think they said at 4 p.m. BDT, British daytime. And so we'll see at this 8 a.m. Pacific Standard, if you want to go off that if you're in the USA. So we will see that next week. I'll do a video on that as well. You know, I'll definitely cover all the goodies. But next week we're going to have a lore video on the Skaven Legendary Lords, the Dark Elf Legendary Lords, another one of the Chaos God videos. We've got a stream coming up here on Saturday. So definitely stick around here, guys. Do leave some comments if you heard some things on the roster reveal that I missed or saw some things from pictures that you'd like to talk about. Always happy to talk more about lore or add to these videos from stuff that you guys see. But thanks for watching here, guys. Have a good weekend and take care.